"You're under arrest for impersonating a first responder," the officer barked, standing sternly in our front yard as my wife, Elena, stood there in her official fire training gear, clutching a dripping garden hose in one hand and a half-chewed protein bar in the other. Just an hour ago, she'd been gearing up for a regional fire safety drill, fully authorized and in her element, to our HOA president. Karen dialed the cops in a frenzy, shrieking about a cosplaying firefighter wasting water. Now, Elena was being hauled away for doing the very thing that could have saved our whole neighborhood. And if you think that's wild, just wait until the real fire ignites. It all began like a peaceful Saturday morning. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, the grass sparkling with dew, and Elena was out back, laser-focused and sharp, running through her firefighter training module. She was halfway through her drill on exterior fire suppression and water angle management, part of the fire department's program for new trainees. For her, it wasn't just a task, it was her calling. Ever since joining the fire academy, she'd been fueled by a fierce desire to help others, especially after watching a wildfire swallow her cousin's home 3 years ago. She'd waited months for this chance to lead the drill that could catapult her to a promotion. Little did we know, the biggest twist was yet to come. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. We will narrate your story on our channel. Emergency, coming not from flames, but from our HOA president with binoculars, a phone, and zero common sense. Karen lived across the street in a 2-story fortress she called the bungalow. Even though it looked like a retired bank, her favorite hobby wasn't gardening or reading, it was patrolling the neighborhood like a budget surveillance drone. HOA power had gone to her head fast. Ever since she became president, she'd enforced the most absurd rules, like banning wind chimes after sunset and threatening fines for having non-HOA approved porch cushions. But this time she saw Elena using the water hose and went into full meltdown mode. I was in the garage when I heard the shouting. I came around the house just in time to see Karen storming onto our lawn, waving a rolled-up HOA manual like it was the 10 Commandments. "Excuse me, you're in violation of water usage rules that hose is not permitted outside of plant watering hours," she barked. Elena blinked. "I'm conducting a certified emergency response drill." The department signed off. Karen cut her off with a dramatic gasp, like she'd just seen a crime unfold in real time. "You think you can just pretend to be a firefighter and play around with the community water? This isn't Disneyland, sweetheart. I'm calling the police." We tried to explain. We even offered to show her the official paperwork taped to the clipboard Elena carried, but Karen wasn't interested in facts. She wanted a performance. She wanted chaos. She whipped out her phone and stomped off while yelling into it like she was reporting a bank robbery. Yes, she's spraying water, dressed in some fake outfit, probably one of those costume things. She might be dangerous. Minutes later, 2 squad cars pulled up. Our neighbors began trickling out onto their porches. Phones came out. Someone sat down a folding chair like it was a live performance. The officers approached cautiously, hands near of their belts, as if Elena was going to blast them with a fire hose full of lava. "Ma'am, we received a report of impersonation and unauthorized water usage," one officer said. Elena, maintaining her composure, calmly stated her name, presented her training badge, and explained the entire situation dates, times, and even her supervisor's name. The officer was listening, that is, until Karen marched right up to them and started laying it on thick. She claimed to be part of the fire department, but she isn't even on the HOA's safety roster. Karen snapped, like that somehow carried the weight of a legal document, and she soaked my mailbox. Look at it. I glanced over her mailbox, had a single water droplet on the corner. Alina's side shoulders tightening. She had faced training fires, obstacle courses, smoke mazes, and now she was battling a grown woman throwing a tantrum over irrigation mist. The officer asked Alina to step aside while they sorted this out. They took statements. Karen's version, of course, painted Alina as a rogue impersonator waging a war against the water supply. Then came the moment where Alina handed over her training documents and showed the departmentist gear, including the radio attached to her belt that literally had our fire captain on speed dial. And just as things were finally beginning to clear up, we heard the dispatcher's voice crackle through the officer's radio. Unit 7B advised possible brush fire developing at Maple Ridge. Perimeter requesting confirmation and civilian precaution protocols in nearby zones. Everyone froze that wasn't part of the drill. Karen stepped back, looking confused. Wait, real fire? Elena's eyes narrowed. That's the field near the elementary school. It was part of my drill zone today. The officer looked between Anne and Elena, suddenly piecing it together. Is this related to your emergency drill? Elena nodded slowly. That's why. I was practicing. We were supposed to run a full neighborhood simulation, and I was going to help coordinate the civilian response section. The officer's radio chimed again. Brush fire, spreading slowly, requesting preliminary suppression. Civilian evac team on standby. The irony hit like a freight train. Karen had just spent 20 minutes trying to get a firefighter in training arrested for using a hose, and now that same woman was needed to help stop a real emergency. I wanted to laugh. Alina didn't. She was too focused. She looked to the officer. I need to get to the staging zone now, but because of the incident, she'd be delayed. Her team wasn't expecting backup until she gave them the all-clear. That meant every second counted. The officer gave her the go-ahead, but Karen still wasn't done. She's going to start a fire over there to make herself look important, she shouted. The officer turned to her. Ma'am, unless you want to be charged with interfering with emergency response, I suggest you step back. Karen's jaw fell open, finally realizing the gravity of what she'd done. The crowd of neighbors who'd been watching quietly started murmuring. One older man even said, "Leave the woman alone, Karen, she's trying to help." As Alina jogged off to her truck, hose in hand, I turned to Karen and said calmly, "You might have just delayed the one person trained to stop that fire. You happy now?" She didn't respond, just stood there, red in the face, arms crossed, steaming in her own self-importance. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a hose. This was about power. Her belief that an HOA rulebook meant more than someone's life-saving work. And that's when I knew we weren't just going to deal with Karen. We were going to expose her. Because, this time, she didn't just waste our morning. She might have endangered the whole community, and the fire hadn't even started yet by the time Alina returned from assisting the fire response team that afternoon. The fire had been fully contained, but the tension in our neighborhood was just starting to burn. She looked drained, covered in ash and sweat, but her eyes still carried that fire of purpose. She wasn't allowed to operate any of the department hoses, given she was still a trainee, but her coordination during The evacuation drill had earned praise from 2 of the senior firefighters. They even said she might be fast-tracked for promotion if she could prove her leadership in community readiness. The problem was, Karen's false 911 call had now made it all more complicated than it should have been. While Alina was gone, I had made a few quiet calls of my own. Our neighbor, Raj, the quiet tech-savvy guy with more gadgets than the local Best Buy, had cameras all over his front lawn. I asked if he had footage of the incident from earlier that morning. He did not, just of the police arriving, but of Karen walking up to our lawn, shouting, holding her phone sideways like a boombox, and accusing Alina of being a water criminal. Raj chuckled while showing me the clip, especially the part where Karen yelled that Alina was trying to perform a fake FEMA demo for likes. He even offered to enhance the audio since his system picked up everything, including the part where Karen whispered to herself that she hoped Alina got fined out of the neighborhood. We weren't just going to let it go. The fire captain had already heard about the incident and mentioned that while Alina had technically done everything by the book, her name was now under informal review by the city's Fire Safety Council, not for anything she'd done wrong, but because the HOA complaint was creating noise they couldn't ignore. Apparently, the local council had received an anonymous complaint email titled Fire Fraud in Maple Ridge, which included edited photos of Elena's hose drill from that morning. No prizes for guessing who sent it. That same evening, we decided to attend the HOA's open community meeting. The email invitation Karen sent out had a dramatic subject line in all caps: urgent water violation and safety breach update. That alone told us she wasn't done. We walked in just as Karen was standing at the front of the rec center, arms wide, speaking into the microphone like she was announcing a weather emergency. The room was packed with residents fanning themselves with HOA newsletters and sipping from water bottles like they were sitting through a movie. Karen started by warning everyone about the so-called dangers of unsanctioned emergency simulations, and said she'd seen residents taking liberties with water that could dehydrate our plants and our peace. It was the kind of dramatic nonsense she always peddled, but tonight the stakes were higher. Then she dropped the line we were waiting for. I've contacted the city about an individual impersonating a fire authority using unapproved equipment to perform higher-risk drills. We don't tolerate theatrical displays on HOA property. The murmurs started, a few gasped, some heads turned toward us. Alina stood up calmly, walked to the front, and requested to speak. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. Alina took the mic and began speaking with the same steady voice she used during fire simulations. She explained her training, the authorization she had received, and the fact that she was already being vetted by the fire department for leadership in civilian response. She outlined the purpose of the hose drill and pointed out that it was originally scheduled as part of a fire safety fair until it had been disrupted. She then held up a printed screenshot of the city authorization form with a bold stamp on it: certified training, drill approved. Karen was ready with a smirk until I stood up and handed the tech coordinator a flash drive. The room fell into silence as the video from Raj's camera played on the big screen behind her. The footage showed Karen stomping across the street, screaming into her phone, clearly saying Alina was playing fake firefighter Barbie. Laughter erupted in the back rows, but it got worse. In the same video, you could hear her say, "Let the cops deal with her, maybe." Then she'll think twice before stealing my hose spotlight. Karen tried to interrupt. This is illegal surveillance. You can't just record me like that without consent. Raj from the corner of the room piped up. Street-facing cameras in a public space are perfectly legal. This is your voice, right? Karen didn't answer. She tried to pivot. This isn't about me. This is about the sanctity of our community's water use. This is about rules. This is about drought conditions. That's when another resident, a woman named Doris, from 2 houses down, stood up holding a phone. Funny you mentioned that. Karen, I have video of you this morning filling your hot tub for 20 minutes from the same hose. You yelled at Alina for using you, even told your dog not to bark because you didn't want anyone to look out the window. The room erupted again. Karen's face went white. She tried to gather herself. That was for therapeutic purposes. I have stress-related muscle tightness. Another resident muttered, yeah, probably from all the spying. Alina didn't gloat. She just stood straight, thanked the board for their time, and requested official clarification on whether fire department training would be considered a violation going forward. The board looked visibly embarrassed. One of the members quickly spoke up, saying they had no issue with fire safety events as long as they were properly communicated, which Alina had clearly done. Karen sat back down like a balloon losing air. For the first time, the room wasn't hanging on her words, they were looking through her. Her authority was cracking. After the meeting, a small group of neighbors came up to thank Alina. A couple of teens even asked if she could teach them how to use a fire extinguisher properly. But while Alina's social credit was rising, the damage Karen had done wasn't completely erased. The fire department had temporarily paused Alina's eligibility to lead next weekend's major simulation due to the controversy. Later that night, back at home, we sat on the porch reviewing everything. Alina was furious, not just because her name had been dragged through the mud, but because the drill was now at risk. She'd spent weeks preparing, organizing schedules, designing safety brochures, and planning a neighborhood response scenario that could have helped dozens of families, and now it might all fall apart because one person decided that a hose was more threatening than an actual fire. That's when I had an idea. What if we didn't let the drill fall apart? What if we went bigger? We'd make it so public, so thoroughly documented, and so professionally coordinated that even the HOA couldn't find fault. If they wanted a show, we'd give them one, official, lawful, spectacular. Alina looked hesitant at first, still worried about the politics of it all, but the more we talked, the more the fire came back into her eyes. We had allies, we had footage, we had a neighborhood tired of Karen's antics, and most importantly, we had a cause worth fighting for. We weren't just going to clear Elena's name, we were going to make sure the entire community saw the difference between power and purpose. The next drill wouldn't just be a training session. It would be a message, and we were going to send it with sirens. The next morning, Alina and I were already knee-deep in planning by the time most of our neighbors had started their coffee. The HOA meeting had ignited something beyond irritation. It sparked a fire of defiance in us. Alina's career wasn't going to suffer because someone with a name tag and a personal vendetta didn't like hoses. If Karen wanted to police the neighborhood like a water sheriff, then we'd bring the fire department, the actual fire department, to show her what real authority looked like. Alina called her supervisor to explain her idea. She wanted to transform her original fire safety drill into a full-scale public awareness event, a proper community fire response demonstration. It would be educational, family-friendly, and entirely lawful. Her supervisor was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're talking about turning this HOA drama into a recruitment opportunity. I like it." Within the hour, we had the support of the entire department. They agreed to loan out a training engine for the event, complete with fire-retardant demo gear, controlled smoke machines, a burn box to demonstrate flashover behavior, and a medic tent set up for kids to learn first aid basic. Alina would be the coordinator, not a trainee this time, but the acting director of the event under the guidance of 2 captains. She looked at me with that fierce look I'd seen only twice before, once when she passed her written firefighter's exam, and once when she hiked down a mountain to help rescue a stranded family on our camping trip. She meant business. Meanwhile, I worked on logistics. We needed space permits, equipment, and neighborhood buy-in. The open field behind the clubhouse, technically public HOA land, was perfect. Karen had used it to host her bizarre enlightenment through gardening seminar last spring, which involved chanting over tomatoes. If she could hold an event there, so could we. We submitted a permit request to the city with official fire department backing that took Karen out of the equation immediately. But just in case, we went further. We created a flyer titled Maple Ridge Community Fire Awareness Day with a logo and everything. I designed it with bold colors, a cartoon Dalmatian wearing a helmet, and phrases like smoke safety tips, live fire demo, and meet the fire crew. We didn't mention Karen, the HOA, or the hose incident at all. We made it so kid-friendly and informative that no one could object without looking ridiculous. That didn't stop Karen from trying. 2 days after we sent out the flyers, she began her campaign of petty sabotage. First, she posted on the community app, warning that NANHO-sanctioned events may expose residents to liability risks. The next day, she put up signs around the neighborhood claiming the fire event was dangerous for small pets and immune-sensitive residents. Then came the passive-aggressive emails. One subject line read, "Worried about sirens? You're not alone." She claimed the sound levels from the drill would exceed local decibel limits, and referenced outdated city ordinances that had been repealed years ago. We didn't even bother responding. We let the fire department handle it. One of the captains personally called the city's safety office to clarify everything was not only legal but encouraged. The city even offered to send a council liaison to attend the event as a show of support for civic preparedness. That's when we knew we'd won that battle. But Karen wasn't finished. On the day before the event, I was checking our backyard one last time to gather supplies when I noticed the pressure gauge on our outdoor hose station blinking red. I opened the compartment and immediately saw the problem. The primary hose Alina had set aside for her water demonstration was completely cut, clean slice like it had been done with shears. Someone had deliberately sabotaged it. At first I was stunned. Then I remembered that I had installed a motion T-triggered sprinkler cam above the tool shed after Karen had walked through our yard uninvited. A few weeks back, I checked the footage. Sure enough, around midnight, Karen had crept along the side fence with gloves, clippers, and her phone flashlight. She snipped the hose, muttered something about fake drills, and disappeared back into the shadows like a low-budget villain. We considered reporting her right then and there, but Alina had a better idea. She transferred the footage to a USB and handed it to the fire captain. "Let's wait," she said with a calm smile. "Let's show it to everyone at the right time." I understood what she meant. Revenge wasn't the point. Truth was. The next morning, the event began just after 9. The field buzzed with activity. Kids ran around in plastic helmets, adults clustered around safety stations, and volunteers passed out snacks and water bottles with the event logo. The fire engine arrived, with lights flashing but no sirens, and 3 uniformed firefighters set up the controlled burn area. There were CPR lessons, fire extinguisher demos, and even a crawl low in smoke obstacle course. It was the kind of thing that made people feel empowered. Instead of policed, Alina walked among the booths like she had been doing it for years, coordinating, giving short speeches, shaking hands. I watched her talk to a woman whose teenage son had asked about joining the cadet program. Her voice was calm, confident. She had transformed a moment of humiliation into a day of purpose, and just as the main fire demonstration was about to begin, Karen arrived. She stood at the edge of the field in a bright pink visor, arms crossed, looking like a statue, carved from pure disapproval. A few residents tried to greet her, but she brushed them off when the fire crew lit the controlled burn in the metal flashover box. Karen's eyes widened. Real flames danced in a safe enclosure while the firefighters explained how quickly fire can spread. A few parents clapped. Karen began to pace. Then she walked over to the medic tent and loudly asked one of the volunteers whether anyone checked if this was legal. Alina overheard it. Calmly, she walked over, took the mic, and addressed the entire field. "We're grateful to the city, the fire department, and all of you for helping make this event a success. It's important to remember that every second counts during a fire, and the most dangerous thing isn't always the flame, it's misinformation." She gave a short pause before continuing. "Unfortunately, this event was nearly canceled because someone decided their personal grudge was more important than our safety. That person even vandalized emergency equipment." To make their point, murmurs spread across the crowd. Karen froze. That footage has been handed to both the fire department and the city council. Alina said, "But we're not here to shame anyone. We're here to prepare, and I'm proud to say, after today, this neighborhood is more ready than ever." Thunderous applause followed. Karen tried to leave discreetly, but the timing was off. As she turned, a volunteer walked right into her, knocking her visor sideways. A bottle of water slipped from her hand, splashing her shoes. It wasn't much, but the crowd noticed. She rushed off, red-faced, trying not to slip in the grasp. That night, as we cleaned up, people came by one after another to thank Alina. They brought their kids, their parents, even their skeptical HOA friends. Some asked if this could be an annual event. Others asked if Alina could teach a safety class at the local school. She smiled and said she'd love to. I asked her later how she'd stayed so calm with Karen breathing down her neck all day. She shrugged and said, "Karen's just fuel. I use it to keep the real fire going." The next step was clear. Karen wasn't going to let this go, but neither were we, and with the neighborhood on our side, now we had more than a hose. We had the truth, and the truth had firepower. The following week began with a strange kind of calm. Elena's fire awareness event had been a success. The fire department had sent a formal letter of appreciation, and several residents had even posted online praising her professionalism and community service. But in our neighborhood, calm never lasted long, especially not when Karen was involved. For a few days, she went quiet, which we should have known was a warning sign. She was planning something. It was in her nature to sulk before she struck Alina. Meanwhile, continued with her training and was scheduled to speak at a regional safety forum. The next weekend her credibility had not only been restored, but elevated. The city council was even considering making fire awareness fairs a recurring event across other districts, using our neighborhood as the blueprint. But not everyone saw that as progress. It was mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. When the trouble returned, I was working in the garage when I heard sirens again, this time closer. When I stepped outside, I saw 2 police cars and 1 unmarked black SUV pulled up near the clubhouse. Several residents stood nearby, whispering and pointing. I thought, for a split second, maybe there had been a break-in or someone had gotten hurt. Then I saw Alina standing calmly next to the officer's, arms crossed, and Karen pacing with a folder in her hand. My stomach dropped. I walked over, already knowing something stupid was about to unfold. Karen was waving the folder in front of the officers, face listing accusations like a prosecuting attorney in a courtroom. Drama. She was claiming that Elena's fire safety event had violated multiple codes, endangered children, and operated as an unlicensed public gathering. The officer, clearly exhausted, told Karen he'd already read the city's approval forms, but Karen wasn't after the truth. She was after revenge. She endangered my property. Karen insisted. The smoke from the controlled fire seeped into my sunroom. I had to air it out for 3 hours. I demand restitution. One officer turned to Alina and asked if the firebox had been cleared through the fire marshal. Alina simply reached into her bag, pulled out a laminated approval sheet, and handed it to him. Without saying a word, the officer took one look inside. "This looks fully signed off." Karen wasn't done. She raised her voice and claimed she had a witness who saw Alina tampering with HOA irrigation lines during the event. This time the officer's expression changed. He looked toward the clubhouse cameras and said that'd be easy to verify. Neighbor, a guy named Theo, stepped forward. "I was manning the water station all day. Alina never touched a single HOA line. She brought her own hoses and tank. Everyone saw it." Karen turned red again, but this time something in her snapped. She pulled out her phone and screamed into it live, streaming herself and claiming she was being silenced by a radical water activist who pretends to be a hero but is destroying HOA traditions. Her follower count was probably in the single digits, but she performed like she was talking to millions. The officer calmly told her she could either leave or risk being cited for misuse of emergency services. Karen finally backed off, but as she left she locked eyes with Alina and muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "You haven't won." That night, I checked the HOA community forum, and sure enough, Karen had started a new thread titled "The Dangerous Rise of Untrained Fire Enthusiasts." Her post was an incoherent rant that accused Alina of setting fires to get attention and alleged that we were secretly campaigning to take over the HOA board. She even posted a blurry photo of our garden hose, captioned "Weapons of Deception." But what caught my attention most was something she mentioned at the bottom, a warning. She claimed she was organizing a neighborhood safety task force to investigate ongoing community violations and hold unapproved drills accountable. In other words, she was building her own rogue committee that could only mean trouble. Alina rolled her eyes when I showed her. She said she wasn't worried. I disagreed. Karen didn't need logic. She needed only one slip-up, one technicality, one false witness. I reminded Alina that Karen had already cut our hose once and sabotaged her event. There was no telling how far she'd go now that public embarrassment had stung her pride. The next day, Our answer came sooner than expected, around noon. A code enforcement officer from the city arrived at our door with a clipboard and a sheepish look. He explained that he had received an anonymous report that our property contained unauthorized hazardous materials. Alina laughed out loud, which startled him. The officer was clearly embarrassed. He asked to do a quick inspection, and we allowed him. He walked around our yard, checked our shed, noted our extinguisher placement, and then apologized profusely for wasting our time. He said this was the third anonymous report he'd gotten this week from the same source about different neighbors. One claimed someone was operating a welding business out of their garage. The reports were obviously malicious. Still, they had to follow up. Alina thanked him politely and handed him a bottle of water before he left. But we both knew the war was escalating. That evening we had an emergency meeting with a few residents. Those who had seen through Karen's game, Raj, Doris, Theo, and 2 new families showed up. We gathered around our patio, discussed the fake reports, and agreed it was time to act. We couldn't sit back and react to Karen's antics anymore. We needed to go proactive, Theo suggested. We request a formal audit of HOA leadership behavior, citing Karen's misuse of emergency calls and repeated harassment of a licensed trainee. Raj said he'd compile a timeline using footage and screenshot. Doris offered to present the case to the HOA's Oversight Committee, which had been mostly dormant since Karen took charge. Alina, ever composed, said she didn't want revenge, just accountability. Our petition Karen struck again. This time, it was almost too stupid to believe. On Friday morning, Karen reported Alina to the State Firefighting Training Board. She claimed Alina was misrepresenting herself as a firefighter, conducting unauthorized drills and misleading the public. The letter was full of spelling errors and dramatic language. Still, the board had no choice but to contact Alina for a formal clarification. Alina met with a board rep who knew her by name. He had already seen the footage of the fire awareness event online and even praised her initiative. He told her off the record that her accuser seemed unwell and advised her to continue documenting everything. Alina returned home, exhausted but undeterred. I handed her a cold drink and told her it was almost over. She looked at me with a tired smile and said it better be, because the next time she calls someone on me, I might have to start charging her for wasting public resources. That night, we finished drafting the petition. It was airtight. Every video, every complaint, every piece of Karen's hypocrisy was in one clean folder. We were ready to take it to the Oversight Committee. We sat in silence for a while on the porch, the sound of sprinklers ticking in the distance. Then Alina said something I hadn't expected. You know, if she had just asked what I was doing with the hose that day, just asked, I would have invited her to watch the drill. She might have even learned something. I nodded, but Karen didn't want to learn. She wanted control, and now she was going to lose it, because the real fire was never about water, it was about power, and we were finally ready to extinguish it for good. By Monday morning, everything was in place. The folder was complete, the signatures gathered, and the presentation ready. Alina and I weren't just confronting Karen anymore. We were confronting a pattern of behavior that had been allowed to fester under the name of neighborhood order. What began with a hose had turned into something much bigger. We had no interest in drama for its own sake, but if someone tried to tarnish Elena's name, compromise public safety, and weaponize authority for personal gain, then yes, we were going to drag the truth into the light. The HOA Oversight Committee meeting was scheduled for 6 o'clock p.m. Sharp at the community center. It was usually a quiet affair, but word had spread. Over 24 residents showed up, far more than anyone expected. Chairs were added. Some stood in the back. Even the city liaison officer made an appearance. It was clear that this wasn't going to be a normal meeting. The board members looked nervous. Karen, on the other hand, wore a smug expression, her arms crossed like she'd already won something. She had no idea what was coming. Alina waited until the board opened the floor to grievances, then stood up with quiet confidence and introduced herself. She didn't raise her voice or act dramatic. She just told the truth. She explained her role as a fire trainee, the purpose of the water drill, the city's approval, and how every step she took was authorized and intended to protect the community. Then she calmly explained how Karen had not only interfered with that, but escalated it to dangerous levels. She told them about the false 911 call, the destruction of equipment, the midnight hose sabotage caught on camera, and the fake code enforcement complaint. I stood beside her as support and passed out printed copies of the timeline Raj had assembled. Every incident was backed by timestamps, photos, and footage. The motion-activated camera footage showing Karen cutting the hose drew audible gasp, but Alina didn't stop there. She played the recording of Karen shouting into her phone, mocking the fire safety drill, and then followed up with the letter Karen sent to the state training board, riddled with accusations that had already been dismissed by the time she finished. The room had gone quiet. Even Karen seemed unsure whether to defend herself or just disappear. Then, to top it all off, Theo stood up and addressed the board directly. He spoke not just as a neighbor, but as a retired emergency responder himself. He said he'd never in his life actions a threat, not just to Alina, but to everyone in the community who might need help during a real emergency. Several residents clapped. Others nodded silently. Karen sat frozen for the first time in months. She didn't have a snarky comment. She looked completely cornered. The board members asked a few questions for clarity, but it was obvious they were rattled. The city liaison then stood up and informed everyone that her office had also received multiple complaints from Karen that were deemed unfounded. She confirmed the city supported Alina's event, and that further misuse of emergency services could result in fines or even misdemeanor charges. That was the final nail in the coffin. The HOA president, who had been friendly with Karen before but now seemed thoroughly embarrassed, read from a prepared statement Karen would be formally removed from the HOA leadership role pending a full review, effective immediately. She would not be allowed to represent the board, issue warnings, or initiate community action without approval. A temporary committee would be formed to oversee community operations while a new election was scheduled. Karen tried to protest. She said it was all a smear campaign, that Alina had plotted against her from the start, but the room wasn't buying it anymore. People who had once smiled at her HOA patrols now looked at her like a neighbor who had gone too far. Even the most rule-following residents in the room realized the difference between order and obsession. Karen finally stood up and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. No one clapped, no one cheered. They just breathed like a pressure valve had finally been released. After the meeting, neighbors came up one by one to thank Alina. Some apologized for not stepping in sooner. Others admitted they had stayed quiet out of fear of becoming Karen's next target. One little girl no more than 10 handed "Thank you, Alina" in shaky handwriting. That moment hit harder than all the drama combined. Alina knelt down and hugged her, blinking back tears. It wasn't about the hose anymore. It never really was. It was about being heard, being respected, and standing up when others tried to twist the truth. That night we sat in the backyard with a blanket and some tea, watching the garden lights blink across the lawn. The infamous hose, now patched and coiled neatly, lay beside us, like a reminder of everything we'd gone through. Alina was quiet, the kind of quiet that came not from exhaustion but reflection. I asked her what she was thinking, and she smiled, then said she wasn't sure what came next, but for once it didn't feel like a fight. It felt like something had been restored. A few weeks later, the fire department invited Alina to speak at a larger regional event. Her story about the drill, the sabotage. She reminded them that sometimes the smallest act of preparedness, even turning on a hose, could trigger a cascade of chaos or of courage. It was about how you responded, about how you stayed grounded. Karen was still around, of course, but her influence had crumbled. She spent most days peeking through curtains, occasionally posting passive-aggressive comments online that no one bothered to reply to. She had lost her audience, and more importantly, she had lost her power. The new HOA committee had members who were younger, more open, and actually listened to residents. Instead of patrolling them, the rules stayed, but the tone changed. People began to wave at each other more. They started asking before accusing. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And as for us, we went back to our life, a little quieter, a little wiser, and every time I saw Alina pick up that hose, whether it was to water the roses or test the nozzle for a future drill, I smiled, because now it didn't feel like something that would start a firestorm. It felt like something that had helped put one